All right, so welcome to the webinar on regenerative agriculture. What is it? Why is it important? And how does elderberry fit in? My name is Katie Renneker. I'm from Carmel Berry Company. I am coming to you from Carmel Valley, California, at Central Coast. And I am on the ancestral territory of the Ohlone people. And importantly, elderberry is and has always been considered a sacred plant for the indigenous communities where I'm located. So I feel that our topic on regenerative agricultural practices has very deep roots. This is not a new fad. This is practices that have been around for millennium, and we are just now kind of getting back to this. So new name, perhaps regenerative ag, but old concepts. So I'm really excited to be exploring this topic with you today. If you want to learn more about Carmel Berry, you can use a little QR code. But essentially, we are a women-owned business making elderberry products out of fresh pressed elderberries and elder flowers. Key point is that they are all American grown. Most elderberry goods use dried and imported, and we are really working hard to support farmers here. So we do that through, we have micro grants, we do workshops for elderberry growers, we offer lots of mentorship and support for people interested in growing elderberries. So today, this topic is basically under the umbrella of West Coast elderberry growers, which is the idea is to share knowledge and encourage collaboration of commercial elderberry growers and flowers on the West Coast, all the way from California up into British Columbia. If you are a commercial grower and you want to know more and find out about our previous workshops, email me, and you can find us online, West Coast Elderberry Growers, on the Facebook group. Okay, we have got a really super fantastic panel today. I'm just super honored that everybody here has joined us for this really important conversation. So I'm just going to do some introductions, then we're going to jump right into what these fabulous people have to say. Jesse Smith is up first. He's from White Buffalo Land Trust, which is in Central California. They have been doing lots of teaching and collaboration about regenerative agriculture for a long time, and they were recently awarded a multi-million-dollar climate smart commodities grant from the USDA, and elderberries is one of those commodities. And so I'm really excited to hear more about what they're doing at White Buffalo Land Trust and also that grant. Sarah Shaw is coming from the other side of the US in Vermont, Hillside Botanicals. It's a small hemp and medicinal herbs farm. And their mission is simple. It's to cultivate medicine for people and the planet. And Greg is up next. Greg Richardson is in Piscinas Ranch, which is Central California. He is a director of research and monitoring at Piscinas Ranch. We're going to hear a lot of the scientific part behind all of this from him, which I'm really excited about. He has the farm operations role that blends the agronomist, the scientist, and the compost producer, and he's also an official member of the Sambucus cerealia fan club. Sambucus cerealia is the blue elderberry that is native to California, to the West Coast. Next up is Claire Smith from Tenera Grains is the farm. Tefola is her granola brand that uses teff. Claire's family is a 7th generation farm that's been practicing regenerative agricultural techniques since 2015. By focusing on the soil, they've converted 1,100 acres of farmland from traditional cash crops like soy and corn to regenerative agriculture and ancient grains that includes teff and buckwheat that they use in their granola, Tefola. Next up is Dave Bueller. Dave is Bueller Organics and Elder Farms in Missouri, and they are a certified organic century farm in Missouri that has moved from traditional farming practices to regenerative and sustainable farming. They're also focused on improving the quality of life and the environment and food supplies, and chose to grow elderberry as one of their crops. And they also have a product line of natural and immune supporting goods. Alicia is Alicia Jones. Her farm is called Elderberry on Patent, and she lives in Missouri. She's found regenerative agriculture when she wanted to grow elderberry, but she had a water problem. No well, no pond. So then she read, this is in our notes, but she read Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown and realized how she could grow elderberry with just rainwater by doing lots of these other practices. So she jumped right in, self-taught herself about watching, learning, and putting into practice all that she has learned on her small farm. I'm especially excited to hear Alicia's updates because I've been able to see small glimpses of her journey as she's been implementing these practices in our Facebook group. So I'm so excited. We're going to jump right in. We're going to give each of the panelists a chance to talk about what they're doing on their own operation, and then there will be questions at the end. Always put in the Q&A if you want to, any questions you have, the panelists can answer it along the way, or we will make sure we have time at the end. So, all right, we're going to jump right in. And White Buffalo Land Trust, I'm going to actually I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Jesse, you're going to share yours. So go for it.
Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you all for showing up today. Really grateful to be a part of this conversation. My name is Jesse Smith, and I'm the Director of Land Stewardship for White Buffalo Land Trust. I'm hoping to share a little bit today about our organization, what we do on the land and within our programs, as well as kind of why we have a deep interest in the Western blue elderberry and the potential it has to contribute to a regenerated form of agriculture. So let me quickly share my screen here. Is that all coming through bright and clear? Fantastic. So our organization was founded in 2018 to practice and promote systems of regenerative agriculture. And I think that one of the most commonly asked questions that I get is to define regenerative agriculture, or at least kind of what it means to me. And I do want to kind of hold those two concepts in different spaces, because defining, I think, really limits its potential to support all the diversity of people that are engaged within this field of work. And I think that we do have the opportunity for regenerative agriculture really to mean something unique and meaningful to a lot of different stakeholder groups. Our organization really puts it into practice coming from a perspective of these regenerative principles of agriculture that, to Katie's point, are rooted in indigenous knowledge and communities from all over the world. It's a reminder that we all have been and can be indigenous to place. We are all indigenous to planet Earth, and this is the ecosystem that supports all living systems. And so our organization works through our different fields of focus in services of a form of agriculture that regenerates the life support systems. And so we always start with our land stewardship. We want to be individuals and an organization that is grounded in the work on the land and in the soil. But we also recognize that there is a need to understand more fully the different and changing dynamics of ecological function. And so we do that through our research and monitoring field of focus. We recognize that we need to share what we learn. We need to provide resources to others. We do that through our education and training. And then ultimately we need to have a compelling story. We have to paint the beauty through art and poetry and music and videography, and through that, our communication and storytelling is core to achieving our goals and aims. And then ultimately having products and developing enterprises that not only provide options for people around the world in our local communities and everywhere in between, but also create an ongoing source of funding to continue the work in all the other kind of fields of focus. And so that right there is kind of the structure of our organization. When we talk about land stewardship, and the foundation of regenerating agriculture, we often use these four kind of foundations of understanding, where we need to have healthy soils, robust and functioning water cycles, an increase of biodiversity, as well as kind of supporting the human systems, human health, well-being, access, and joy in relationship to agriculture. And a lot of that comes back to holistic healthcare, and elderberries, I think, are the perfect example of where all these meet. Our organization, through community education, really wants to raise the ecological literacy. We know that students of all ages, policy advisors, teachers, culinary professionals, all of which need a deeper understanding of the soil health dynamics and all the different functional components I just previously I talked about. And so through our education programs of field days and volunteer days, we host speaker series and panels similar to this, school tours, and we help kind of co-design elective series. We hope to meet that need. We also recognize that there are producers, there are farmers, there are ranchers, there are land stewards of all kinds, landscapers, landowners, all of which are looking for the functional skill sets to be able to regenerate the living dynamics of their landscapes and ecological sites. And so we offer longer format intensives, like a holistic management training that's just shy of 2 weeks. We do single day workshops in farm planning and design, and composting and nutrient cycling, plant propagation, and all of these kind of meet that need of those who are looking to go and put something into practice following one of these engagements. Our research and monitoring is a blend of ultimately the information that we need to gather in order to be good land stewards ourselves, understanding forage availability for our livestock, understanding nutrient loads and soil functionality in our vineyard, and ultimately giving us information to make better decisions. But it also overlays the needs that we have in association with our monitoring strategies for different certifications and verifications and ecological monitoring for storytelling. And so this is whether it be organic certification or regenerative organic certification, the Savory's Land to Market, the outcome-based verification, the soil carbon index. All of these are different mechanisms for value communication, and so have their own related protocols for ecological monitoring. And then we also engage with kind of third parties for on-site research, in which it is kind of at the directive, both for funding source as well as project design of different research institutions. So we're working with Caltech on a methane sampling protocol for the next 2 years, looking at the different ecological sites across the ranch and how they function with methanotropes and sequestering methane from the atmosphere. We're working with the Soil Inventory Project to look at soil carbon stocks across the ranch. We're working with Audubon Society to look at bird populations, both migratory and resident. So these are these different components that we're really interested in, others are too. And so having a living laboratory on our property for these questions to be asked and engaged with is something that we deeply support and believe in. And then ultimately, through our product development, we want to provide the opportunity for choice at the point in which humans are deciding what to feed ourselves with, how to clothe ourselves, what medicine to take, and ultimately how to support our human cultures. And we need opportunities to be able to do things consciously, and we need more products like Caramel Berry. I was just going through your website. I mean, it's like you take a snapshot of my family's cabinetry, and it's filled with all of the kind of products that you're creating, and a lot of people don't see those in their everyday lives as part of an opportunity. And so we believe that it's important for more people to bring products to markets, but also more enterprises, land-based enterprises, to be able to support the ongoing regeneration of soil, water, and biodiversity. So we do that in two different ways. We grow crops ourselves on the land. We have a grass-finished beef operation in which we work with Richard's Regenerative or Regenerative, Richard's grass-fed beef, or Richard's Regenerative, which is their brand. We have a small 5-acre vineyard in which we have been transitioning from conventional management to a regenerative one, and have a partner in Sandy Wines to be able to take the storytelling of that kind of single origin, single vineyard Pinot Noir and Chardonnay forward. We do kind of small scale olive oil and other products as well. But those are all derived specifically from the land in which we steward. We also created a food brand called Figure 8 Foods as a platform by which we can source from others that are looking at managing in a regenerative approach, and have an ability to be able to tell that story going forward. So we have a persimmon vinegar that was our flagship product, and we now have an air-dried, grass-fed, grass-finished beef biltong that holds the savory land to market seal on it as well. But these are kind of the principles of approach, wanting the practices and the species to be appropriate for the climate, be beneficial for the land, and if all possible, be perennial in nature when we start talking about plants. So back in 2020, we launched a campaign to acquire the opportunity to be stewards of the land out here at Alama Canyon Ranch, where we started our Center for Regenerative Agriculture. We're located just near Point Conception, the elbow in California. Some of the kind of regional context is we're neighbors to these significant landholders of private ranching at Hollister Ranch, private conservation at Nature Conservancy's property, and private military at Vandenberg Air Force Space Force Base, since I made this slide. But these are the kinds of neighbors that ultimately we're trying to demonstrate an approach to agricultural management or land management that has the positive benefits to it. And in that context, we have a host of different ranches around us as well that we engage with, discuss what the questions are we're all holding, and then ultimately are doing our best to demonstrate going forward. One of the unique aspects of this land itself is the fact that it has on it different ecological sites that we find similar all across Santa Barbara County, as well as California and Mediterranean regions around the world. Each of these ecological sites, though, has a diminished ecological function, most notably due to agricultural pressures in the last 100+ years. So set stock grazing in our rangeland that has diminished a lot of our perennial grasses, that has also led to more erosion and overland water fluid that has eroded our riparian corridors. A lot of that loss of that moisture has depleted our oak woodlands, and a lot of that grazing has depleted the ability for oak regeneration. Sagebrush has not been properly managed and then prevents fire danger. And a lot of our agroforestry of orchards and vineyards have depleted soils due to tillage and synthetic herbicides and pesticides. And then obviously the human development component, where the use of water and impact through kind of our own presence is one that we have to take note of. But we believe that these are not inherent to agriculture or human presence, that there is an opportunity for humans to be in balance with and be a keystone species in the increase of ecological function. And that's where we feel like regenerative agriculture really has the opportunity to bring these principles that are globally held and really rooted in historic indigenous knowledge put into a current context where we now have a diverse set of community members, stakeholders, and cultures all living and coinciding in community. And what we're trying to do is set an intention for a future of human existence that we all can be supported by. And that's where I think that it's important for us to look to the past, recognize where we are in the present, and set our pathway to the future while being very inclusive, is because ultimately everybody is starting somewhere, and we want everybody to be moving forward. So a lot of the opportunities that we found on this property were associated with agroforestry, livestock, and mycoculture, and we directly focus our enterprises on the different ecological sites and their diminished capacity. Elderberries for riparian corridor, buffers, field edges, and flatlands, agave for soil stabilization and perennialization of our diminished rangelands, holistic managed livestock, both a resident small herd of goats and a seasonal finishing operation of cattle, selective thinning and maintenance of oak woodlands through the production of edible, medicinal, and culinary mushrooms. So all of which come out of a need that we recognize within the ecology of the land, and we develop an enterprise in service of that need. So with that, I'll leave this slide up for a few minutes, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about what Katie mentioned in regards to the recent grant that we received. One of the things that we really wanted to demonstrate here at the ranch is some of the funding strategies beyond just the agricultural enterprise business model. Where are there resources available for individuals, whether they be a nonprofit or a for-profit? Where are there funds to support some of this transition work? We've received NRCS grants in the past for EQIP funding, for rangeland development, for vineyard monitoring and soil health practices, and through a lot of kind of community building, recognized that there was a big hunger for more elderberry production in this region, and wanting to find a mechanism by which we can fund kind of a consortium of producers, of market developers, of storytellers, of researchers, was of the utmost priority for us, and especially as it came out of two of the other projects that I'll just quickly mention that we're working on, one of which in almonds and one of which in cotton, both of which are asking the question of, if there is a future for for almond and cotton production in California, what does it look like? And what do we need to know? And what do we need to be investing in now? And so the project around almonds, you can look more about it at thealmondproject.com. And then the cotton is the California Climate Cotton Coalition. We have that project working in partnership with the Fibershed organization. Both of those were unique because they brought together farmers and producers, they brought together processors, they brought together researchers and scientists, they brought together brands and buyers, and they brought together storytellers, videographers, influencers, people who bring this out into the community and thought leaders. And by putting together that consortium, we found that there's a lot of pre-competitive traction and progress that is made about working on the system instead of working in the system, instead of being limited by your own kind of myopic view of your business. You're able to have a conversation about what opportunities there are for the field to grow and evolve. That being said, with almonds and with cotton, it's a very rigid field to be working with. There's a lot of investment to maintain the current circumstances, where elderberries felt like such an amazingly both historically kind of proven that there was communities and cultures that had already shown how to be in relationship with this plant and how they're nested within a living, functioning ecosystem. There's a global demand, there's a market demand that has already been proven, but there's also a regional kind of developing field that Carmel Berry is one of the leaders of. We're talking about the Western kind of part of North America. But there's also the Midwest Elderberry Growing Cooperative. And so there's all these things that we felt were really important to take note of, once again, historically, as well as currently, that kind of set the foundation. But where was the gravity for the Central California kind of coast to be able to invest in processing and market development and storytelling? And so we partnered with the Community Environmental Council of Santa Barbara, the San Ynez Band of Chumash Environmental Office, a small handful of farmers and ranchers within Santa Barbara County, UC Davis and their work in SARUP around elderberry research, as well as a host of different brands who all stood up and said, I'll provide a letter of support, and if there was regional elderberries being grown, we would be very interested in purchasing. And then we got funds together for processing, for actually building out a processing facility in this area. So we're very grateful to have that project kicking off this year. It'll be a 5-year project. It will fund the implementation of quite a lot of linear feet of elderberry plantings. We have currently 3 different planting patterns, hedgerow around field borders, both cropland and orchards, riparian buffer plantings, linear buffer plantings, as well as orchard plantings, giving each land steward their own kind of foundational understanding of what their needs are and then designing systems to meet theirs. All of them will be production oriented though. And then we will also be layering in monitoring for certifications and verifications depending on each individual landowner and whether they're organic or regenerative organic, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll pause. I think I'm probably coming up on my time. I don't want to go over here, but if there's any questions, then feel free to drop them in the chat, or I'm happy to answer them at the end.
Jesse, this is so exciting to hear about the plans of all the plantings of elderberry, since I'm a little partial to that. But and the processing unit will be huge. But I wanted to step back to the bigger picture of what you touched on so well about the importance of regenerative agriculture. Really is kind of repairing what we have overworked, overgrazed, over-tilled, over fertilized, everything. And so it's trying to like reinstate that balance. So I think I want people to kind of keep that in mind as the overview with all of these projects that we're going to be learning about. It's really about how to get things back in balance. And why do we care as consumers about cotton or almond or elderberry, but cotton, almond, beef, because that's really at the heart of this, is how we as consumers can affect the change that's needed, behind the scenes on ranches and farms. So I want to ask you one quick question, because this has come up multiple times leading up to the workshop, is regenerative certification. And if you could just touch on that really briefly, and if we need to later, we can touch on it more.
Yeah, for sure. So regenerative certification is one that I find myself so fascinated with, because it is a value proposition, but it also is a constraint that we hold against the banalization of the terminology of regeneration, because you don't want it to all of a sudden be thrown around in a way that it can be conceived of as greenwashing. And there's plenty of that happening currently. For anyone who just came out of Expo West, this has been happening for years, and because there is no kind of current teeth to it, it can be utilized in a lot of different manners. That being said, we have to also understand what I said before when we discuss the different stakeholders and the different customers of regeneratively sourced or regeneratively produced products. People are looking for something different when they have a relationship with agriculture. So sometimes it's really focused on soil health. People are coming to this from a perspective of climate stability, greenhouse gas reduction, carbon sequestration, soil conservation. So a lot of the focus of the monitoring and the quantification is on soil health. The Soil Carbon Initiative and SCI is very much in that band. Other people, it's really focused on building up upon organics. I always think about organics was very much moving against this industrialization of chemical input and wanting to limit what could be an input to agricultural production. And so now they want to take organic further. I'm an organic farmer. I've been a certified organic farmer since I started farming. There is also a very small pool of people, as far as 1% of the national production of agriculture, that fall within that organic sliver. And so moving the industry of regeneration forward together, it can't be the only kind of stakeholder group that we identify. I'll also throw in, biodynamics and Demeter. That is still well within the regenerative paradigm of thinking of agriculture. Holistic management and the EOV, ecological outcome verification, that backs up Savory's Land to Market. So there's a great article I always like to point people to called "The Lineages of Regenerative Agriculture" by Ethan Soloviev. He just speaks really eloquently about how we have all come from our own line of thinking and from our own place of understanding to give our own unique perspectives of what regenerative agriculture is. So if you tell someone, if someone says regenerative agriculture is about uplifting communities of color in the South, and equity and access and inclusion, that is absolutely right. If someone says it's about soil health and carbon sequestration, that is absolutely right. If someone's talking about bringing back bees or butterflies or migratory bird habitat, that exactly right. But they might be very narrow in the way that they are monitoring for that. And it's part of a much more holistic kind of regenerative field. But I don't think we should also lay blame on people about missing aspects because their stakeholder group or their audience is also asking for something in particular. So the Audubon bird-friendly beef, for example.
Right.
They have stakeholders that care about birds. That's still part of the regenerative community.
Right. Thinking it a bit holistically. Awesome.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Okay, we're going to transition now to, Jesse's is really a big picture with a huge ranch. Now we're going to go switch to Sarah Shaw in Vermont at how they've really transformed a much smaller piece of land to be really doing so much on such a small piece. So go ahead, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And Jesse, it was nice to hear you again. I was in the audience during your session at Expo West. So it's always good to see some farmer-led voices in the room in those conversations. So glad to be sharing space again. I'm gonna share my screen here and bring everybody from the West Coast, transport you through the snowstorm to here in central Vermont. So my name is Sarah Shaw. I'm the co-founder, co-president, wearer of all the hats at Hillside Botanicals. We are a small certified organic, real organic, and bee-friendly farming certified medicinal herb farm here in central Vermont on unceded Abenaki territory. I run it with my husband and business partner, Nathan. And it's just the two of us right now. And I'll kind of preface like how we came to it and, what regenerative means to us. So you'll see I put parentheses around the term agriculture. We really believe that the ways in which we relate to the land are transformative to body, mind, and spirit as individuals and the collective. And so when we think about regeneration, we like to think about it in nested manifestations and how it kind of transforms our ability to relate to the broader living systems that we find ourselves in, as well to one another in our local and broader communities. So our own journeys have been ones that we've found to be very therapeutic. I'll say like my own personal journey here is as a young person, I saw the film The Inconvenient Truth at the ripe age of 13, and it really put me on a journey of, feeling eco-anxiety and, wanting to figure out how do you exist in the world where it feels like there's these big, big monumental issues that, are hard to find your own kind of lane to navigate. And so for us, farming showed up as a way of having a tangible sense of advocacy and the bigger picture of climate chaos and what can we as individuals do about it. And so we kind of took this indirect route to coming to farming and what we now steward as Hillside Botanicals. So a little bit about kind of what drives us. We thoroughly believe that our collective well-being is rooted in the wisdom and vitality of the earth. We utilize the natural systems around us as our teachers and guides to cultivate high quality crops in communion with robust soils, clean water, and healthy plant and animal communities. And our mission, as Katie said earlier, is to cultivate medicine for people and planet. And we mean that in a couple of ways. We are literally cultivating crops with therapeutic value, a broad variety of medicinal nutrient dense crops. But we also see that a lot of those have multiple functions and that they can help with regenerating and restoring soil fertility. And again, the act of working with the land in a very intentional way is therapeutic and regenerative to us as humans. So you'll see some of our values there, kind of stacking the idea of resilience, wellness, and regeneration in a few different ways. As we go through this presentation, I'll kind of highlight, what our farm is looking like right now in our enterprises and highlight a couple practices that we're really excited about that are working for us. And how it's all really been informed about the land that we've been working on, which as farmers and land stewards, the land should always be kind of that North Star telling us where to implement certain things, where to back off, and how to tweak as we go through seasons that have radically different conditions. So here's kind of like our timeline. We are running into our 5th year here. We started in 2018. That year was definitely just a lot of implementation work. So we're blessed to have access to some family land that my partner grew up on. It's about 90 acres here in central Vermont. We primarily started working with hemp. The land itself had been farmed about 30 years ago, but then was kind of just hayed and mowed, and then, nothing was going on for a long time. And so we wanted to start with something that we could, one, obtain a yield with economic value, and could also help us start regenerating the soil fairly quickly. So we're starting to work on about 6 acres in a very spread out way that I'll share a little bit more about soon. The following year became certified organic and started exploring the integration of other medicinal herbs. At the time, I was working through my training as a clinical herbalist. And so we really wanted to be intentional about integrating other crops that were, again, of high value, and that we could, at the time, kind of bring the energy around hemp and CBD as a gateway into what does this broader world of traditional medicinal herbs look like, and making some unique formulas that mix the plants that we were growing. And so at the same time, we launched our value add CBD products, started introducing some perennials, including elderberries, sea berries, and apples. We're very blessed to have some awesome resources in the perennial cultivation space here in Vermont. So we've got some really great species we were able to gather to start building our own propagation resources. And in 2021 and 2022, we really expanded our medicinal herb cultivation, growing about 20 different varieties, increased our value add production, and became certified as an organic processor of value added goods. And most recently added a retail plant nursery enterprise. We really are excited about the potential, again, thinking about how humans relate to the land. The simple act of gardening is just so beautiful and transformative that we wanted to be a resource for folks to come to in our area for really high quality perennial and medicinal planting stock, and bring some educational opportunities around that, from how to design and cultivate your medicinal garden to how to make your own herbal teas, your elderberry syrups, and really thinking about how can we regenerate the idea of community resilience and caring for ourselves and our loved ones. So wanting to be that resource here in central Vermont. And looking ahead to this year, we are transitioning our cultivation quite a bit after the past few years with just 2 people, mostly human powered. We're a little burnt out. And so we want to kind of fast track our long-term vision of going into a more perennialized broadacre system, shrinking our annual production quite a bit, and maintaining our focus on our value add production and nursery, and then broadening and evolving our on-farm educational opportunities to respond to that growing interest from folks. So here's our land base, simple contour map. So this is my in-laws' property. Shout out to them for letting us experiment and do lots of things. So this whole piece here is about 90 acres. Our cultivation is primarily focused in these upper fields. We're on quite a hillside. This is about 6 acres. We have market gardens here as well, and a couple beds here. And so one of our biggest challenges and opportunities has been designing a farm on a hillside. And we always knew that we wanted to integrate perennials. And so thinking about how do we work with the land in a way that we're not going to contribute to soil runoff and erosion, particularly as we experience more chaotic weather events. So in the past 5 years, we've had record-breaking droughts. We've also had record amounts of rain. And so wanting to acknowledge how do we conserve and store water on site and also keep soil where it needs to stay and continue to build that soil ecology in a mindful way. And so we've been thinking about this for a while. So this is a picture of a design charrette I did in 2015 for a permaculture course, where it was like, if you could dream up this property, what would it look like? I'm laughing here because, again, this is my in-laws property. And I was like, look at all the stuff I'm going to do here. We've started to do a lot, but we're obviously not doing everything. So I'm just acknowledging this because we had design, we wanted to include lots of fruit and nut varieties, doing lots of interesting polycultures with things like elderberries, sea berries, apples, elderberries, and then wanted to think about, what does evolution look like of this property? So I always come back to this because it is pretty cool to think about some of these things have come to fruition. And my husband and I never farmed before. And so at some point in time, we've kind of learned some things and seen some of these come to fruition. And so this is what it looks like in practice right now. So that's that upper field that looks a little bit like a T-Rex. So we designed our entire field with swales on contour, again, wanting to be mindful of snowmelt and water retention on site. And so our beds, you can kind of see from here, are fairly spaced apart. The idea, again, is that we always had that mindset of we want to transition to a perennialized landscape and leave room for certain tree and shrub varieties to have plenty of room to grow. So we've actually started putting some of those into our system, our elderberries, sea berries, black walnuts, apples, and more going in this year. And when we first started out, we did have some ducks that we were pasturing through the field to help with slug pressure and building in some fertility. They have since cycled out due to our organic certification and the proximity to soil-bound crops, which I think is just like an interesting challenge to think about. How do we build soil and integrate animals and exist within the parameters of certifications? And so kind of taking those big picture concepts and going a little bit deeper. And I know there's lots of growers on the line, so I wanted to include some of the practices that we're really enjoying and having fun with, and acknowledge some of the challenges we've had. So we again have been primarily doing a lot of annual cropping. There's plenty of perennial medicinals we've been working with, but with these swales, you can see there's a lot of edge with just meadowland that we have to mow, and then lots of creep of weeds. And so we're primarily human powered with hand tools. And so weeding has been a huge pressure for us. So we're actually redesigning how we do annuals and fast tracking this vision of perennialized trees and shrubs that we don't have to spend so much time weeding in between with. So if you look at, the Regenerative Organic Alliance or ROC certification, any of the other kind of regenerative certifications that are out in the space now, there's a heavy focus on soil fertility, as there should be. We really take that into a unique perspective of how can we build soil and mycelial ecology and microbial ecology in a way that also is helping us obtain a yield in a small space. And so, of course, cover cropping is really important, particularly on a hillside. How do we keep that soil held where it needs to stay and prevent runoff? We're doing our 3-year rotations with annuals that we're required to do with organic. And then we're also integrating some functional cover crops. So as a medicinal herb farmer, we get the benefit of many of our usual cover cropping friends, like our red clover and oats, also have great medicinal value and are actually primary crops for us because they have value for other herbalists, product makers. And so it's been fun to think about how do we, build in some green manures and organic matter into our soil and obtain a yield at the same time. So we have a good rotation happening with oats, red clover, and winter rye. Sometimes these things are happening simultaneously. So you'll see here first year of some red clover coming in. Meanwhile, we've got hemp growing, and that came out the following year. And so there's red clover growing that we collect blossoms from. Mulching has been a really useful tool for us. We, don't have a lot of financial resources available to us at the moment. So we've been thinking about how do we, create some of these resources for ourselves. And so we invested in a bagging attachment for our mower. So while we do have to utilize fossil fuels to mow in between our beds, how can we make use of that in a more intentional way? So we're collecting those clippings, which do have a lot of naturalized clovers, things like that, that add extra nitrogen, and include that in our mulching. That is, again, keeping down weed pressure and increasing organic matter over time. And we've definitely made lots of use of cover crops that are bio drills. We are rich with heavy clay soils. And so it's been a practice to bring in unique ones like fenugreek and turnips. And also with mulching, we are definitely having a lot of fun with inoculating our wood chips, particularly under our woody species like our elderberries and sea berries. We have King Stropharia mycelia that we have been inoculating in our wood chip piles. So we are creating more functional benefits to that. And then of course we admit that we do till, but we are doing so mindfully, surface tills to integrate our cover crops and any other soil nutrients that we're adding in. So this is one of our only tools here is our BCS tractor. Other fun things that we really enjoy working with that are low cost and that things like elderberries love, particularly around transplanting, are compost teas. We love this because this is something you can create your own nutrient streams on farm. So we're really utilizing this not only as a boost for fertilization, but also helping to boost a plant's natural immune system. And so you'll have copies of this slide that has instructions on how to make this and play with it. But I wanted to show a really kind of low cost model. So we're making use of gravity on our hillside. Our irrigation system is completely gravity fed, power free. We do have an injector pump that helps us feed liquid fertilizers like our compost teas and fish emulsion. And so we're really kind of making a concoction that's utilizing locally available resources, some of which we're growing on the farm. So you'll notice things like Nettles comfrey horsetail, which are also commonly used in biodynamic preps. So thinking about how can we create medicinal teas for our plants? It's all a paradigm that we're looking at. And then kind of diving deeper into biodiversity, we really see that as a lens for how to design and run your farm and business in general. So we're very eager to be implementing more polycultures like this classic apple comfrey mint one as we build out our perennial system, but also like what does biodiversity mean in your business? So overall, we've had this really long-term vision, again, going back to 2015 when I was like dreaming up, whatever on paper and thinking about what are those long-term goals and how do you phase them in year over year. It might be requiring some tweaking. We've noticed, for us, we're actually going to be increasing the amount of elderberries we're growing because there's definitely some underwater springs on the hillside contributing to really wet soils. Elderberries are okay with wet feet, so it makes a lot of sense for a high value crop that we can help stabilize soil and obtain a yield over time that is going to be useful for our own product production, but also for others in the area. We're playing with strategic intercropping and also purposeful inclusion of pollinator species. So we are bee-friendly farming certified. We are required to keep 3% of the land dedicated to forage from spring to fall when the pollinator is out and about. We, doing so, are creating intentional plantings of annuals and things that are pollinator friends. Thankfully, a lot of medicinals are nectary resources, but also we are maintaining wild spaces within the meadows. And of course, doing more progressive establishment of perennialized system and also thinking about diversity for business resilience. If anyone's familiar with the hemp industry, it has had some major roller coaster moments the past couple of years. So we've been intentionally diversifying into offering more value add medicinal products like teas, tinctures, and also, of course, the plant nursery. So thinking about how can you innovate in a mindful way that meets your goals. And then I think I'm close to time. I can't see the chat, but I wanted to think about, again, this is my love of like, what does regeneration beyond the farm look like? I think as farmers and growers and folks working with the land, we have a lot of power and insight to share this experience with folks, and thinking about what is a culture built upon trust and interdependence, and one that mimics nature's old ecosystems look like. And so these are just kind of some of the ways we look at it. You know, we always want to be sharing the knowledge that we're gathering in really accessible ways, doing workshops ourselves, inviting folks in our community to do skill shares, thinking about how can we really support one another. We also believe in solidarity and reparations as really important as white farmers in, on unceded indigenous land. And so some of the ways we do that is we work with our local Abenaki community, growing traditional crops for them and donating them back and helping them save seeds, helping to bring those crops and continue their story and relationship with the land. And then, all the way to like, how do we deal with the idea of packaging? Small plug for One Step Closer that I also work with. We're running a zero waste campaign. So if you're interested about learning about what, advances in zero waste packaging look like, definitely reach out. And then of course, how do we become, forever advocates and activists that support the land and a culture of regeneration? So, we can continue to percolate on what all of these things mean and how do we create this culture together. And I love talking about those kinds of things. So definitely stay in touch. And there's our website to kind of explore more about what we're thinking and doing and how we approach this work.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could spend 5 hours just learning about all the different projects just on your land. There's so much to dive into there. So I didn't want to interrupt because it was just too interesting. So thank you so much. Wow, you guys have got a lot of different parts of this bigger puzzle. So thank you for giving us a glimpse and some of the hardware behind that too. Okay, next up is Greg. And yes, Greg, I'm gonna put some fingers up in the chat when you have 5 minutes left and 2 minutes left. So, and again, any questions? It looks like Sarah, you've got one in the Q&A for you. And any other questions, just keep on putting them in the Q&A. Okay, go ahead, Greg.
All right, well, thank you, Katie. I'm going to share some slides here. And thank you to Jesse and to Sarah for really setting the tone. I think there's a lot of complementary content between my presentation and what you shared, but I think actually in ways that are going to work really well together. So my name is Greg Richardson. I'm the Director of Research and Monitoring at Panelists Ranch. I in practice, kind of am involved in a number of different aspects of the enterprise here. So I help to support with compost production, manage some fruit trees. I am involved in some degrees of outreach and education. And I also help our vineyard team, particularly with fertility decisions. And so when we were looking at the potential of planting more permanent crops here, I was looking at what kind of array of options existed. And elderberries were something that really were exciting to me because they do grow native to this area. We actually already have them growing on the ranch. And as the climate on the West Coast starts to get hotter and drier, it seemed like these are actually a crop that require relatively less irrigation and are actually adapted to some of those conditions. And so I come into this formally with a background in soil science and agroecology. And I've been here for a little bit over 4 years. So Panelists Ranch, you can see it on the map. It is inland from Monterey Bay, about 45 minutes drive. It is in a double rain shadow, so we get an average of 12 inches per year. We are just along the San Andreas Fault, which I mentioned because if you saw me jump, we've had 5 earthquakes this morning. That was probably a 3.0, but it's a little unsettling this morning. We are in sort of the southeastern part of the unceded Amah territory, and our main enterprise is it's a 7,500 acre ranch. So it's kind of going back to these large, expansive properties. So primarily sheep. We do some cattle, some poultry, some pork, pigs for pork. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our wine grape production, but to just kind of ingratiate myself to those who are interested in elderberries, I want to acknowledge that, there are a large number of them that grow throughout the property. And these are volunteers. They're technically wild. Sometimes they congregate more kind of around the edges of some of our crop ground. But I've mapped over 150, and they're probably, close to double that. They're out here. And so Katie mentioned at the beginning, or kind of in some of the introductions that she did prior to the recorded session, that I've actually been working with her to sort of harvest some of our elderflowers and sort of help kind of provide a local source to her line. And, sometimes this is great because they're easy to harvest. They're, not too far from a road. You can kind of walk around and kind of collect a bunch. But oftentimes they're along fence lines that are sometimes barbed. This one is electrified. They're usually fairly spread out, and they're quite tall. So it requires, walking through this field with a ladder, looking for rattlesnakes, walking slowly, repositioning that ladder many times. And as a result, I've been just trying to kind of get better and better about efficiency, but there are some inherent challenges of doing it this way. And so I'm going to focus kind of as we talk about regenerative agriculture on how we're approaching this through wine grapes and wine grape production. We have a 25-acre vineyard here that was really designed to be regenerative in its orientation. And so the place that I want to start, and this kind of echoes a lot of what Sarah was talking about, is that, within an agroecological system, right, there's this stacking of different systems that are embedded within it. And so one of the things that I sort of like to think about is that the diversity, the number of sort of cogs on this wheel, the number of different types of plants, different birds, insects, et cetera, are going to increase the resilience, the redundancy, right, of making the system work. And so the diversity that we have is really a really important part of the resiliency of our farming system. And especially as things like the weather, which is represented on the top here, become more volatile and are a little bit harder to predict. And so you can imagine that as we simplify the system, when more cogs are missing, that, it's more likely for these cycles to start to break down. They become more brittle. And there's a great quote, this woman, Helen Attow, who used to run Woodleaf Farm up kind of by Chico in California, said in a talk I was in that if you kill something in the system, you inherit its job. And if you think about that from the standpoint of, if you're spraying something that kills not just your pest insects, but all of your insects that are in the field, well, then you need to continue to manage your pest insects because you may not have the same beneficials. Or if you do something that impacts sort of the nutrient cycling that naturally occurs in your soils, well, then you're going to need to add more fertilizers to make up for that. And so it's just a sort of a framing that I thought was really important. To realize that the more that we impact the system, the more it actually requires us to get involved. And so when you put the sort of human condition in the middle of this, or the human element, that really comes into effect, right? I think that in a natural system, when you convert it into agriculture, you're going to simplify it in some way. And so I was asked the question about a month ago. There was a workshop here, how we define success. And one of the things that really came to me in that moment is the less that we have to intervene, the more that these systems can thrive on their own, the better. And so the more that I can actually knock cogs off of the wheel in the center, the better. And I think that there's also, a very important kind of piece to hold here, which has been brought up a couple of times around sort of the diversity of who the people are that are involved in farming and have the decision-making power, and kind of where that knowledge sits and where it comes from. And that, there's I think a critique of regenerative agriculture that a lot of people are approaching it solely from like a biophysical perspective. But our goal, I think one of the measures of success from a biophysical standpoint is if we can improve the water holding capacity of our soils, and we can irrigate less, and we can improve the soil microbiology so that we have to apply fewer nutrients, and we have, better sort of expansive, diverse populations of birds and insects, so we don't need to apply the same kinds of biocides, then we don't have to go through the field with our tractor as much. We don't have to assert ourselves. We don't have to buy as many things. And so there are a lot of cost benefits that come with this as well. And so when I think about what is regenerative agriculture, I'm thinking about kind of something that improves the whole system. And so Jesse alluded to the fact that like there is sort of this narrowing down on carbon, soil organic matter. And that is, a big driver of what makes all of this work. But it's important to me to not lose sight of that whole system. And I'm not saying that. I think that Jesse is totally on board with that too. And so this is maybe one distinction that makes sense to me for thinking about sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture. I've heard people talk about how you don't really want to sustain a system that's already degraded if you're coming into this sort of legacy of overgrazing and overtillage and sprays, that if you reach something that is considered sustainable, that's great, but conceptually, how do we actually kind of raise it up so that it's better than we found it? And quick aside, that, on that note, you were saying, Katie, about how we're just kind of trying to return to something that's more natural. That a lot of the soil health principles, there are sort of 5 main agreed upon ones of reducing disturbance, having a lot of, living cover, covering the soil, plant diversity, and I think animal impact are the 5, that all of those things actually just naturally exist in a natural ecosystem. That really, if you go to, a wildland area near where you live, like all of those things are probably going to be true. And so we're just trying to kind of think about what are the tools and the techniques that we can use to return to these principles through which the landscapes that we operate in, how they actually evolved. So the last quote for this slide that I wanted to bring up was a quote from this guy, John Kempf, who's sort of a thought leader in the regenerative agriculture space. He hosts a podcast that I highly recommend called Advancing Ecological Agriculture. Or I think it's the Regenerative Ag Podcast. And someone asked him, if you're starting from a conventional context, if that's where you're starting from and you want to go towards something that's more regenerative, how do you do that? And he said, well, first off, avoid taking the actions that benefit your plants or your crops at the cost of the whole system. And I thought that was really just like a poignant way of putting it, that, you can add fertilizers, you can add pesticides, right, that are going to help your crop, but they're going to degrade the system. And so how do you move away from that so that the things that you're doing to manage for pests is actually not just supporting the crop, but everything else around it too. So this is a quick picture of a comparison between some vineyards that are neighboring us. Thank you, Katie. On the far right and in the middle, and then our vineyard on the far left, taken on the same day. And this is a situation where, they do have covers in the middle of their rows. It's not like I'm saying that it's a bad situation, but if you think about it from the perspective of the birds and the insects and the soil microbes, there's just a lot more, I think, resilience that we have been able to achieve, at least in this moment in time. Another quote that I liked was, we don't want our beneficials to commute to work. We want them to live where they work. And I feel like I was kind of hearing some of that come through in your talk, Sarah. So we have seen a large increase in the number of spiders in our vineyard, which we've taken to be a sign of success. These are the apex predators in their class. And, we have not been seeing issues with thrips or with mealy bugs or with mites in a way that, can be common in vineyards in California. And I would attribute it to the fact that, we're trying to create an ecosystem where these types of spiders can proliferate. And so we did a study in 2021 compared to another neighboring vineyard, and we found that we had about 3 times the number of parasitoid and predatory insects, but the same number of potential pest insects, herbivores and sap-sucking insects. And so without spraying, pesticides, we've been able to use IPM to essentially keep our pest insect levels at bay. We've just done surveys to kind of keep track of bird species in the vineyard, and so far we've counted 68 species, which I think is pretty good. We don't have a great basis of comparison or baseline there. 58 different plant species in the understory. Some of these are planted, some of them are just kind of volunteering. Some of them, like the narrowleaf milkweed in the top right, are a native that have just kind of come back. So what we're hoping is that we're creating the right conditions for this diversity of plants to re-inhabit the space. And so one of our tools that we use are sheep. And so the design of this vineyard is actually such that it's 5 feet off the ground, or the trellis system is, so that we can graze sheep year round. And so they do a lot of potential weeding and trampling and nutrient cycling for us. And we even have things like snakes that are a little bit scary at times, but also play a role in the ecosystem, and we allow them and sort of support them being in the vineyard. For that reason, they help us with our rodent populations. And so just kind of quickly in practice, what is this? I've just kind of shared some of the outcomes and the ideas. We are planting cover crops generally. It's a little tricky, kind of not knowing how much rain we'll get on a given year, but we do allow ground cover to come up in the vineyard. To deal with pests and disease, we're really trying to promote the health of the vines so that they can kind of be resistant on their own. We integrate livestock, like I said, for nutrient cycling, but they allow us, because of weed management, not to have to till and not to have to use herbicides within a certified organic system. And then we have, these bird perches and nest boxes to bring them in. And so with all of that, you can imagine there are sort of these co-benefits that exist. And so one of the things that we've seen so far, this is organic matter level percentages in the soil compared to pits that were dug at like before the planting of the vineyard. And we have seen improvements that are really meaningful that we're hoping to see continue to rise, that we haven't sort of plateaued at this point. But this is over, the course of 7 years or so. So very encouraging. And with that, I'm going to end my talk. I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat or at the end. Thank you.
I'm muting myself. Thank you, Greg. Super interesting. I love all of the data that you're tracking about species, soil health, organic matter, because it's nice to have not just the experience, but also the data behind it to back it up. So I know that takes a lot of time, but super important. Awesome. I just learned a lot. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to the Midwest now. We're going to go to Claire Smith from Tenera Grains and Tefola. And I am sharing my screen. So let me bring it back up. Go. Present. You can all look at my lovely computer. There we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. All right. Good evening, everyone. Not evening. It's afternoon here. I haven't had enough coffee. But so we are based in Southern Michigan, and this is America's High Five. We're down here. And yeah, I'm just super grateful to be here and learning from all of you. I know nothing about elderberries except that I enjoy consuming them. So I'm also learning a lot. So our farm, we are on about 2,300 acres, and we are raising crops on about 1,100, 1,200, depending on the year. So we're a little bit bigger, but yeah, I would still consider us a small to mid-sized farm, just because we're in, the cereal belt of the Midwest. So we have been regenerative farmers for a long time, decades, I would say. So as Katie mentioned, I'm the 7th generation to be raised on the farm, and my grandfather stopped tilling, I think, in the 70s. And what I do want to be like very honest about is it wasn't, you know, an environmentally friendly, like that wasn't the primary reason he actually stopped tilling. It was, you know, from a financial perspective, he was like, if I don't need to be tilling this land and, you know, paying people to do it, then we don't need to do it. And look, it's actually also beneficial. So he stopped tilling decades ago. And then when my father took over the farm, he was playing with all sorts of things. So when I was growing up, you know, the fields behind our house would just switch between corn and soybeans, like year in, year out. It was just, you know, corn and soybeans, and then, you know, the odd wheat field or alfalfa field. But as my dad took over, and this was in, you know, 2011, 2012 timeframe, he started to introduce more cover crops and just some different crops in there. So we were playing with rye and barley and adzuki beans and a lot of different legumes just to introduce just different nutrients and that kind of thing. So we started growing. So the cash crop prices were just all over the place in 2013, 2014. And so my dad was looking for something to kind of stabilize our income on the farm. And, you know, a farm, we're not a nonprofit, we're you know, trying to run a business and that kind of thing. So he was looking at how can we, you know, create a farm that not only is profitable, but is something to be sustained for the next 7 generations. And if we had continued going the way we were, it just wasn't going to be around, much less another generation, much less 7. So in 2015, a friend of ours, a friend of the family's who works in agriculture in Eastern Africa, he came back and said, listen, gluten-free is kind of becoming a thing here in the States. And in Ethiopia, they grow this grain called teff, and it's, you know, a pretty big deal out there. So our intention was, my dad planted 33 acres of it, and we had no idea if it was going to grow. He pitched me on this idea. I was living in Western Canada at the time, and he said, hey, we have no idea if this crop can grow, but you are welcome to come back and, you know, do something with it. I was learning that I don't like being told what to do, so I quit my job and jumped into the ancient grain space. So that first year, it actually came up beautifully. And even though the climate of our area, I'm laughing at Greg because 12 inches of rainfall, our area gets 38 inches per year. So we are extremely wet, and water is always an issue, having too much of it. So teff is native to Ethiopia, and our seed was coming right from Ethiopia. So we hadn't done any, you know, crossbreeding to really find something that would work for our climate. But you know, hot and dry in Ethiopia compared to really, really humid and a lot of clay in our area, we had no idea if it would actually work. So it did end up coming up really, really nicely. And our intention was to figure out how to clean it and separate it from all those weed seeds, figure out how to mill it or find someone to mill it, and then sell it to Ethiopian restaurants. And that kind of works. So you'll see here, the picture on the right is a field of teff. So it's a grass. It is in the wheat family, but it's naturally gluten-free, non-GMO, etc. And so we enjoyed that process and playing around with it. And then I created this granola recipe using the teff. So I wanted to introduce this new ancient grain to people in a really like a familiar way, but just introduce them to the teff grain. So I came up with this granola recipe, and it also uses buckwheat groats. So if you go back to that previous slide, Katie, on the right is buckwheat. So I convinced my dad to try growing buckwheat, and it turns out we can grow buckwheat a lot easier than we can grow teff. So buckwheat in our region is considered the poor man's crop because your soil doesn't it doesn't have to be spectacular soil to grow buckwheat. So as we're going through this process, we were learning that finding processing for these grains, and by processing, we mean just dehulling the buckwheat or just cleaning the teff. That's the only processing that we do. It was really hard to find someone who could maintain a gluten-free status for us. And additionally, very few people have even heard of teff, much less know how to clean it. And so the only facility that we found in the entire continental US that could keep our gluten-free certification or keep our gluten-free status and knew how to clean teff was in California, which is really far away for us. So we invested in a cleaning and processing facility. So here we have, I don't know if you can tell, you guys are growers, you all collect loads of equipment, I'm sure. So we have, 4 or 5 different pieces of equipment and a lot of bucket elevators so we move our grain through this facility and we end up with a really clean product. And because we don't let any gluten in here, we're able to keep a gluten-free certification, and it's been really helpful for us as growers now, because I spun off this value-added company with the granola. And now we're also talking with other growers in our area who need this cleaning and processing done. And so we're able to help other farmers who kind of want to move away from the instability of commodity farming into these niche specialty grains. So that's been kind of our process of how we're looking at diversifying what is happening on our farm. So yes, we are cover cropping and crop rotation. We're exploring rotational grazing, although I'm very jealous of everyone who has figured out fencing. We have some, 20 head of cattle, and just because they're fun, but we have not figured out rotational grazing on our land yet. But it's been a long process. I will say we work with, my dad works with soil consultants, and so he has been for the past 4 years. So we're sending out our soil for testing, and then they help us figure out, and obviously it's different for every field. So they're helping us figure out which inputs and what to do and how to apply and that kind of thing. So that's been extremely helpful, because they do believe in the same regenerative agriculture principles and practices that we do. And so this past harvest, we've been working with those consultants for, I think, 4 years now, and we had by far the best harvest that we've had in many, many years just last year. So that was also helped by investing in a new combine and a new soybean head and a new corn head. So there are investments that do have to be made, but when you look at the year that we had last year, they, and if you can replicate that to some degree, it pays for itself pretty quickly. So in terms of, my company, my value-added company, I'm now talking a lot more about regenerative agriculture and introducing this type of, our company's about good for you and good for the planet. So we're combining both because consumers are looking for both now. Something that I find super interesting is that 75% of millennials are actively changing their buying habits with the environment in mind. The sustainable household goods category, so that includes pet food, paper products, and food. That category is growing at a growth rate 2.5 times that of conventional products. So sustainable goods aren't going anywhere. And you all know this. So I think it's about meeting consumers where they are. And for us, this means our new product line, Teffola Bites, which literally launched 6 days ago, and has had an overwhelming response. This is product that's on the go. So we're taking our signature product line, Teffola, and making it portable. A lot of the feedback that we were getting is that customers want to take our product on the go, because we all have busy lives and we want to, eat in the car or have something with our coffee or whatever it is. And so we developed this, and it's, a clean ingredient label. And I will say, by no means have we 1,000% figured out regenerative agriculture. Absolutely. we haven't figured everything out. You know, there's 3 people on the farm and only 2 of them are full-time. Between my parents, my 2 parents and I, we have 4 businesses, and there's a lot to manage on a larger size farm. But what you have to think about as a grower, if you're communicating with the public or if you're developing a CPG or a consumer packaged good, is being transparent and open and, you know, honest about where you are. So this year, one of our big projects as a value-added company is, you know, showing what the supply chain looks like for, you know, each of our ingredients. So obviously for teff and buckwheat, we are sourcing directly from our 7th generation family farm, which is a really impactful saying, but we're also doing that with our maple syrup. But when you look at other ingredients like cashews and cinnamon, those are not grown in the States. And so how can we pull together, you know, maybe it's developing regenerative standards of our own. And because, I mean, Jesse, the whole conversation around a regenerative certification is, for us, it's a bit tough. Yes, it's about building trust with consumers, but how do you measure that when it can mean so many different things? So it's tough to measure that, but as we go forward, it's all about developing trust with the consumer and, you know, what they're looking for, and a lot of education. A lot of people aren't familiar with teff and buckwheat, so it's introducing these grains to them and also introducing the grain supply chain. So I think grains, I suspect they're vastly different than perennial because we are all annual cropping here. So it's, you know, it's about education and, you know, sharing where we are in the process. And yeah, so that's a bit about us. I know I kind of jumped a little bit all over the place, but if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Very shameless plug, eattuffola.com for some banging granola. It's certified gluten-free and low sugar, and the bites have a lot of fiber as they are held together with dates. So yay, dates. We love dates and fiber. But thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I want to say that Claire, the reason I wanted Claire to be part of this panel is even though she does not grow elderberry, she does, as she said, annual crops. Her communication on what is regenerative agriculture, I actually put one of her blog posts link in here, has been really interesting to follow in terms of educating consumers on what it is, how she's can source some and can't source others. And above all, that, you know, this is a journey. We are not all going to arrive at the end point and have a perfectly beautiful regenerative system right away. So you're doing, you know, all of us can do the section that we are able to control right at that time and move forward. So thank you so much. Okay, we are going to, and again, if you have questions for Claire or anybody, pop them in that Q&A and we'll get to them. Okay, Dave Buehler, also Midwest. This is Missouri. And so Dave, walk us through where you are on your regenerative journey. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Dave. Let me see if I can unmute you.
Here we go.
Yep.
Yeah, my name's Dave Buehler from Missouri. I live on a century farm. My family farmed this farm since 1899. Most of its life, it was a dairy farm, and we grew traditional crops, corn, soybeans. And as the years went by, it was tougher to make a living. And I had listened to the research center out here about 18, 19 years ago. They were doing some different field days, and I heard them speak about elderberry. And I had a cousin down the road. He put a few acres in, and I thought, I'm just going to kind of see how it goes with him for the first year. And then we jumped in a year or two after that and planted the first 10 acres. And that was a huge planting at the time. But one of the things that I was really wanted to do with this crop was, how can we really make a dent in the demand? And I was interested in how we can get this more like a row crop for farmers, where we can put this in fields. We do a lot of custom planting all over, from Iowa to Oklahoma to Arkansas to Missouri. And we put a lot of this elderberry on fields that are like high erosion. So this is definitely something, this is a plant that helps stabilize the soil, helps build up the soil. As you can look, this field right there in front of us on the screen, fairly flat field, but we're in the river bottom. And a lot of times when we were traditionally row cropping this field, we would have a lot of soil erosion. So once we established the elderberry grove in here, we came back in with some cover crops. We interseeded clover in with the elderberry. And for our pollinators, for our bee production, honey production, they have a great source of nectar with the clover. And then the elderflower is more of a pollen source. But usually by the time the clover flowers are kind of diminishing, the elderflowers are kind of coming on. And then also we raise quite a bit of hemp. And so that flower kind of comes even after the elderflower kind of goes away. So, regenerative was not something that I should say I'm just was really into or interested in. It was just a journey of how can we mimic nature? How can we be, what plants will complement other plants? And I think that was kind of my regenerative journey. It wasn't something I studied in a book or went to school for or anything like that. It was how can we take some of these practices and educate other farmers and educate them like, hey, this really works. It doesn't take a lot of extra money to do. These are some of my photos of my hippies that helped me. I'm passionate about elderberry. I absolutely love it. It has brought the fun back in agriculture for me. I was very burnt out with corn, beans, cattle. As a farmer, you're kind of told this is how you do things. You buy this seed, you buy this fertilizer, you buy this chemical, and then you sell this crop back to the same companies that you basically bought the seed and the chemicals for. And it's a system that I think big corporations have created. And I see a lot of interest from farmers looking for alternatives. We've turned this farm almost into an educational farm where I do tours almost daily. There is somebody that drives up this driveway from somewhere wanting to learn about elderberries. And so we teach them all the different things we're doing. There's some other small elderberry farms around here. The Southwest Research Center is about 2 or 3 miles from us, kind of the center of all the elderberry research that's going on. So we try and give people a really good vantage point of how this would fit into their farm situation. We see this as a multi-million-dollar industry that we can create on a grassroots effort. And it's not just elderberry, it's other medicinal plants. And it all fits into that regenerative type agricultural scenario. If you got that video, when we first began doing custom planting, we were told you need to work the ground up, you need to lay down plastic for a weed barrier, and then you need to go ahead and plant your plant in that plastic. So we kind of knew this crop. That's what we started out doing. But what we noticed was that when it got dry, when it got very hot, it almost cooked the soil underneath. So then that's when we started looking at more natural type mulches. Right now we're doing a lot of compost mulching. We're doing a lot of tree bark mulching, tree chips. We have a lot of sawmills around here. If the farmer has old hay or straw, then we utilize this. So this is a no-till planter we built almost a year ago. We have 2 of them now. They travel all around. If a farmer buys cuttings, then we let them take a planter with them to plant their crop. But we absolutely love it. I mean, it opens up a little furrow. They can stick that cutting directly into the soil, and then it closes it up right behind it. And then after we get them planted in, we'll come back through and do some kind of mulch application. Our biggest, what we found and other farmers have found too, the biggest challenge with planting elderberries is keeping ahead of your weed and your grass pressure. If you can kind of keep that down to a bare minimum where the plant is not being pressured, the plant will go ahead, take off, and once it gets 2 or 3 years old, it almost kind of shades a lot of the weeds and the grass out. And we're still learning on this. We're still learning, what makes the best type of mulches, both for the earth, for the root zone, for the plant. And so it's been very interesting because a lot of this journey, we're all pioneering, every one of us. And we're trying to figure out, we're trying to help educate others. We did a little Elderberry conference here a week ago, and it was just so interesting. I got to learn so much how everybody was doing things, and everybody is an open book. We were in the cannabis industry a little bit, and the cannabis industry was very, very closed. There was no sharing. They didn't want you to know anything. But with the elderberry, everybody is very giving, very open. We're educating the public. We're educating these farmers. Very exciting thing that's just happened here in the last few weeks. Been working with a lot of Kentucky organic chicken farmers. And there was 1 or 2 of those farmers that had planted elderberry. And basically what they do, they free range their chickens, but they also have a house they go in at night. Well, they planted these elderberries kind of in a way that as soon as the chickens came out of the houses, what did they do? They ran directly for those elderberries because they were given protection as far as any kind of predators. They were given shade. And, there's insects in with the elderberries. They love elderberries, period. Chickens and elderberry is a winning combination, both with the chicken manure for the elderberry. And, we've had a lot of talk about this avian flu in the chickens. And the chickens, I believe, now this is my own opinion, can utilize the elderberry just like the human being. So if the chicken is experiencing different types of viruses, just like the human being, why not, instead of vaccinating it with some kind of vaccine, let's provide some kind of nutrition for that animal that's going to help build its own immune system. And elderberry, what we feel is the best for that. So that to me is very exciting. When we're talking about regenerative, we're talking about, everything from cover crops to how we plant the crop to integrating livestock within. And I think it's going back to that journey process. This was not something that I just set out to do. It's just kind of organically happening with all these farmers. So I think sharing our story with others is the most beneficial thing we can. I'm very, very concerned. 95% of our elderberry is imported from Europe. And a lot of it is imported out of Ukraine, Poland, some of these countries right now that we're seeing a lot of war going on. I had a elderberry buyer contact me just a few months after the war had started. He had left Ukraine and was in Poland at the time. And they were getting in 20 metric tons at a time. And they wanted us to build them a destemmer for this amount of berries. And my mind was blown. I was just like, oh my God, that's a huge amount of berries. But I think, I'm not saying that supply will be diminished, but it's going to be definitely cut way, way back. And I think us as American producers, we need to really look at our regional food production as food security. And, we are not even a drop in the bucket for what the demand is. And so I feel very like a sense of urgency that we need to get this out there to as many farmers as we can, I try and speak about this every day and get out there to people and say, hey, this is a viable option for small farmers on a small acreage. As far as regenerative, sustainable, it's a native plant here in the United States, along with the blue elderberry. So yeah, I'm very upbeat. It's very thrilling. It's thrilling to be at the beginning of an industry that we can all kind of shape and form as we go. And I think putting the regenerative part of it is going to be very important going forward. So
Totally agree. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so a couple of things I want to point out. I put Dave's YouTube channel here. He really underscored the fact that the elderberry community of growers in the US is incredibly generous with supporting each other and sharing of knowledge. And it's because we are building a new industry. This has not been done here before. And creating hubs of growers nearby that can share information, as Jesse is building down in Southern California and others have done, starting to do in the Midwest and in Oregon, building hubs where growers can work together and share equipment for processing as well, means that we can be on a level playing field with imported berries too. So that's one of the reasons why I, make sure that I do this a lot. Jesse, I see you 1 second. One thing I wanted to also say about Dave interacts with a lot more elderberry farmers on a regular basis than I do because of the Midwest. There's more there. Dave, there's been a question about foraging of not just chickens, but goats and cattle in elderberries. Can you speak to that at all?
within the last year, we've seen a lot of interest in that. I've had a lot of questions about that. And I tell people all the time, let's try it. I think definitely at certain times of the year, we can put grazing animals in the elderberry. You've got all that grass in between your alleyways. Let's graze that off. There you go again. You're mimicking nature. In nature, you would have wild animals grazing, doing their droppings, refertilizing the soil. I think what is it, 90 days that you kind of have to pull your livestock off before you can do any kind of elderberry harvest or any kind of berry harvest like that. But yeah, I tell people all the time, try it. Let's see what happens. Share those results with all of us. If you have, sheep or cattle or something like that. And I do have a lot of small farms that they may be very limited on their acreage and they've got livestock. And I tell them all the time, you don't have to take that out completely. You can definitely pasture at certain times of the year and have your animals in there. So
I do know that horses don't touch it. Deer do. And so I don't know what cattle and sheep will do in that regard, but try it and share your experiences.
Sure.
Jesse.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So interesting to see your piece on the planter, and it kind of raises a question for me, as we've been a part of a community that has been trying to grow a regional equipment share cooperative as well. What are some of the things that you have identified as integral to kind of regional planting, maintenance, harvest, and processing that might have had to be innovated around, fabricated for, or just weren't readily available within the kind of equipment marketplace that are specific to elderberry?
We had to build everything. When we began, there was only one other destemming machine on the market. So what did I do? I got on YouTube and I looked at other industries. I was like, okay, how does the grape industry destem theirs? So basically what we did, we took a grape destemmer, tore it all apart, rebuilt it. For 2 years, we messed with it till we got it just working perfectly. And every time I watched that thing work, I was like, oh my gosh, that is just so exciting. But that's what makes it so fun with me. I looked at the nursery industry and I was like, okay, so how does the nursery industry plant their seed stock fruit trees in the ground? So we went to salvage yard, got some metal, welded and cutted some stuff together, and they work great. And we're building a new generation of planters again, and we loan this equipment out. And a lot of farmers don't have destemming equipment. So I tell them, I say, look, just harvest your berries, put them in buckets. If you can keep them cool or freeze them, bring them to me. So I think making regional little processing areas, sharing equipment, that's what I'm trying to do here in this multi-state region, is anything that I can do. If you're interested in growing elderberries, I'm going to help you any way that I can, because I want you to be successful, because your success is all of our success.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Just one last follow-up is so, and we can take this offline, but I think there might be some value as well for the group, and hearing in the propagation and ultimately the stock that you're planting out. Are you doing any kind of seedlings to support kind of the expansion of kind of biodiversity or natural selection, or are you so doing select cultivars and varietals and finding kind of regional kind of stock for that?
So with the research farm out here, they've done years and years of research. We have probably 5 or 6 main varieties, kind of what they're recommending. I did get a new variety out of Iowa called East Grove this year. And then we have one out of Arkansas called Pocahontas. So as time goes on, we're finding new plants in the wild, kind of doing production tests on them, doing the numbers, what issues do they have with insects, diseases, what's their chemical compound makeup in the berries. And so from that, we're taking it. When a farmer comes to me, I say, look, I'd like to see you plant at least 2 or 3 varieties in your area. These are kind of, and I share the stories not only from the University of Missouri, but also from other local farmers. And I said, this is kind of what's working. I think as we go forward, part of the $5 million grant that the university got some of that will go for a plant breeding program. To give you an example, the Pocahontas that comes out of Arkansas, amazing grower, amazing producer, but it gets so heavily loaded with berries when we get a storm or a high wind, it wants to blow down. So in time, can we crossbreed a plant with something with a little bit stronger stalk? We're not going to see genetically modified plants or anything like that, but just a very basic, simple plant breeding program, I think is just, we're so in the infancy of this industry. People talk about the cannabis industry being young. Shoot, we're just being formed in the womb. I mean, that's.
And I will follow up with that just very briefly before we go to our final speaker, that blue elderberries on the West Coast are even before that. I mean, the Midwest with the elderberry cultivars that have been developed are about 20 to 30 years ahead of where we are out here in the West in terms of developing cultivars that have the things that we like: good yield, ease of harvest, great juice, all those things. I mean, we're like way below. And so we've got a whole other workshop, that needs to happen. And we've got a lot of work going on offline on cultivar development and research on growing the blue elderberry out here. So, okay, I am going to, we could talk about that forever. We're going to go to last but not at all least, by any means. This is Alicia Jones. And what I love about Alicia, like I said earlier, is that she's really been figuring out all these things along the way. Like many of us, this is a journey. And so, Alicia, take us on the journey. Where are you now?
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. I started in 2020, me and my husband, with 17 cuttings we got from an elderberry conference, and decided that we wanted to do this and planted them, realized we had the water issue like you talked of, but we went ahead that fall and started prepping our fields. I had been using or looking into the back to Eden method, so I knew I wasn't supposed to till, and I knew I needed to keep it covered. But so we ended up mowing and putting down the cardboard. We put cardboard and lots of hay, and that's what you see there is just the beginning of our field. We purchased 2,100 more cuttings in 2021. We were a little overzealous, and it was a lot of hard work, but we got them all in. And still concerned with water, I felt prompted to reach out on a Facebook gardening page and ask some questions. And somebody told me about the book Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. And it was my first introduction to regenerative agriculture. And it answered so many questions. And again, I was using the Back to Eden method, but this just was like a whole new level. So I contacted Gabe by email, and he so graciously got back to me. I asked him if he knew any elderberry growers that were using regenerative. He didn't, but he gave me a couple names of men that he worked with in Missouri. And one of them got back to me and told me, since my land had been just hayed for years, that it needed to be healed. And he said that there's almost always a bank of dormant seeds in the ground just waiting for the right conditions to grow. So that's what we've done. We have 7 acres of, I'm a really tiny farm compared to everybody else, but we have 7 acres of growing area. We have 3 acres dedicated to elderberries, and I just let it all grow. And so I went ahead and started putting the regenerative principles to practice. And so I'll go quickly through this. I have used, I've been studying under Understanding Ag, which is Gabe Brown. You know, he's a partner in that. And so these are their 6 principles. They go along, I think they're universal. The first one is to know your context or why. And when we moved to our land, we knew we wanted to have a small business. We didn't know what it was. Somebody introduced elderberries. And after that first conference, we realized that's what we wanted to do, because we knew it was something I could work on. There was a market for it. It grows well here, and it would just be a good stepping point in beginning our farm. The second principle is do not disturb. So that's what we did. We didn't disturb the ground. We don't till, and we didn't till when establishing our rows. The only disturbance we've done is when we stuck that cutting in the ground. The third is cover and build surface armor. And so we've kept the soil covered either by the cardboard and hay, which we used to suppress the plants below so the cuttings could have time to root and establish themselves without any competition. And then we're just allowing the natural perennials to grow on the paths between. Talking to this gentleman that was mentoring, he said, you should be fine not putting any cover crops in. You have plenty of perennials there. So it keeps costs down, and that's what we're trying. So the fourth is to mix it up, or diversity. We didn't want a monoculture growing, even though I absolutely love the look of the rows of flowering elderberry with the paths all neatly mowed, and it just looks beautiful. But I had to change my mindset because we didn't have water. And so there's plenty of diversity out there with all the flowers and the grasses growing there. The fifth one is keep living roots in the soil. So we always have living roots. We don't dig anything up. We will mow once a year. And so we're sticking to what's called the third rule of adaptive stewardship, which is disruption. And it states that nature becomes stagnant if we settle into a routine with our management practice. Just like if you were to go to the gym and do the same routine over and over again, it wouldn't be quite helpful for you unless you mix it up a bit. And so disruption helps keep things moving forward. And so between those paths, my husband he would mow, he'd go to the closest side of the one elderberry row and blow the grass onto the other side to get the mulch on the bottom. And that actually really worked. That we just did that last year. But so this year we're going to have to mow at a different time. We mowed at harvesting time. So we'll probably mow when it begins to flower or is fully flowering or just starts to berry, but at some different point. And then the sixth principle is to grow healthy animals and soil together. And we have not done this yet. Our plan is to use chickens to go down the rows, either in just letting them go or to use a chicken tractor. We'll see how that works. Parts of our fields have done better. Obviously, these pictures that we've shown here, this is our better parts of our field. I didn't take any pictures of the areas that we are kind of struggling with, but definitely putting the cardboard and hay down in the fall was helpful, and putting lots of hay on there allowed for the cuttings that we put in to stay moist through the summer. Like I said, we never watered, and it suppressed the weeds really well. When we tried setting up some of the fields in the spring, we live kind of on a hill and there's a lot of wind. And needless to say, we were picking up quite a bit of cardboard in our neighbors' fields, but we just know we needed to use a lot of hay. I don't want to keep purchasing hay each year, and so that's why this last year, we tried in this particular field to just mow it and throw it on to the other side. So the mulch was already there. And like I said, it turned out really nice. I know weeds are a huge issue, and the hay has held, but weeds do still come through. But I'm trying to learn from the weeds in a different way. They tell a story of the soil that is underneath, and I want their roots in the ground because that can be beneficial. And so this year I've seen another elderberry farm where they go out and just weed around the perimeter of the elderberry, just to keep some of those weeds from right up by the plant. From what I've studied, my understanding is that by improving the soil, the plant life changes, and each weed grows because of soil conditions. So if you change the soil conditions, you'll change the plants. And one of the quotes from Dr. Alan Williams from Understanding Ag, he quotes this from another gentleman, but it says, a species will move into an environment when the conditions are suitable for its establishment, and will move out of that environment when conditions become unsuitable for its reproduction. So as I allow the principles to work, I believe there will be a change in the plants I see growing around my elderberries, or that's my hopes. Another issue, of course, is bugs. I've dealt with the Japanese beetle. It's one of my biggest enemy, but I noticed that some plants didn't get touched at all, but others would be slightly torn out or just totally eaten up. And I was listening to a podcast by the same gentleman that Greg brought up, John Kempf. He was interviewing a Dr. Thomas Dykstra, entomologist, and he states that insects only feed upon food that is considered unfit, nutritionally poor, dead, or dying. And the higher the Brix count, the healthier the plant. So again, it all stems from the soil, but my focus is to get my Brix count up to 14 or higher. And one way I'm going to be striving to do that, just trying out this year, is by using fermented plant juice made from the elderberry plant. I'm going to use it as a foliar spray in hopes of stimulating and increasing the soil biology. And we'll see if that works. But sometimes when I'm looking out at the field and thinking, is this even going to work at all? I listened to a seminar by Alan Williams from Understanding Ag, and he allowed me to use these pictures. These were taken in March of 2022 in Central Valley, California. They experiencing a D4 drought. And he said there were miles of this. They just took pictures and pictures of these orchards. And if you want to go to the next one, if you have the university model, nope, didn't show it that one. There was one of the university model orchard, and it looked about the same, where they were teaching the farmers, and they sprayed it 12 or more times per year with pesticide. But then just 30 miles away was this farm, and they're using, this was on the same day he took the other pictures, and they're using the regenerative practices still in a D4 drought. This farmer has been doing regenerative for 4 years. He was doing conventional, and you can see the diversity in there. I don't know if you have the one with the animals on it. He is taking sheep through as well, and it's just beautiful. And so this gives me hope that what I'm doing will work, and encouragement, and I'll have healthier soil and healthier plants, and that my berries will be nutritionally dense, which is the ultimate goal of what I want to sell to my customers. So I'm grateful I've had this opportunity to share, and I'm really hoping for great progress this year on our farm.
Thank you. I love, Alicia, your trial and error and how you document what is working and what isn't. And you tackled focus on the next thing to improve bit by bit. I put a couple of your recommendations for things to listen to and read and watch in here as well, because I thought those were really valuable. I do want to point out a couple questions that you've seen the sheep going through the orchard and wondering whether goats or cattle can do elderberry. And in the Q&A, somebody mentioned that goats chew on the plants but then get sick. And I have heard of animals getting sick also, including chickens. But then I know of a lot of people whose chickens do just great. So again, it falls into the category of, with elderberry, more research is needed. We're just right in that hot zone of needing more information right there. So in the interest of guarding everybody's time, this was just super interesting. I want to give a couple more resources for you. The Midwest Elderberry Conference is coming up in June in Missouri, and it is invaluable networking, communication, learning that happens over a 3-day period or 2-day period. I highly recommend you come if you are able to come to Missouri. Hanford Farms is Kirsten. She's in Oregon, and she's the other hand of the West Coast Elderberry Growers Group. And she does a lot of her own workshops online. And then out here in California, working with the Blue Elderberry, the UC Davis, the Sustainable Agriculture and Research Education page has some great information on where we are in the infancy of developing elderberry as a commodity. We did the Q&A, except we have a few more. Dave, somebody wants to know, what prep did you do for your cuttings before you put them in the ground?
Mostly just neem oil. We usually do a kind of a chlorine, and then we'll soak them in neem oil, take care of any nematodes.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Again, no, I don't know what I was saying with that. Okay, next question that's in the Q&A. And maybe Jesse, if you want to take this, where does land back play in any regenerative models presented? If you know of any, work on that going on.
Gosh, I think that this is a big question in regards to regenerative agriculture as a whole. And I think in elderberries, we kind of have the added layer of this being not only a native crop, but also one that has been in both recent and far off kind of context been stewarded by indigenous communities. And so one of the reasons why we've structured the program the way that we have is that it's in kind of shoulder to shoulder project development with our local tribal community through their environmental office that both has their tribal native plant nursery being the ones that are doing the propagation and providing the stock for the plantings across the project, as well as the different project sites being in service for skill building and training for their environmental office to give access to materials for cultural and ceremonial purposes. And so it doesn't, I guess, answer the question directly, but we do feel like each project has an opportunity to engage with the different communities that are both indigenous to the place in which the projects are endeavoring to regenerate, as well as kind of to service, what is needing being regenerated itself. So
I would like to say that up where I am, the Amamutsan Tribal Band has a really fantastic partnership with Pie Ranch right on the coast, where Pie Ranch actually has land for the Amamutsan to plant, educate, use for ceremony, and so that's a partnership that has really done a fantastic job. The Esalen tribe recently acquired land back in their ancestral land here on the Central Coast as well, with great plans to incorporate medicinal plants in their planting and programs there. So I actually think that is a really good segue into our thank yous and goodbyes, because it kind of takes us full circle. Really quickly, you'll get these slides mailed out to you and in the recording as well, so you can find these links later. But West Coast Elderberry groups for commercial growers, West Coast Elderberry growers, and the Elderberry Growers Connect and New Elderberry Growers are all Facebook pages. If you are in the hobby category, Elderberry World and Elderberry Hobby Growers. Also in this slide deck, you're going to get some more resources that I added in the different sections of Jesse and Sarah who shared their slides. And please always come and find me, Carmel Berry Company, and know that, you know, when you are working with me, I'm also supporting the farmers, not just when you purchase from me, but also when we band together to share information like this out with growers and consumers. So I think that's it. The contact information is here for each of the panelists. Alicia, I didn't have your email, so I'll get that and added in if you want to have people connect you that way or on Facebook. So just many, many thanks to all of you for the time and going over on this super important subject. So thank you so much to all of you. Thanks for everybody for tuning in, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.